We have to characterize his interests and accomplishments by the word breadth. This is a man who has many accomplishments in many spheres. In addition to the things that we think about his contributions to computing, he has also built an organ in his house, written books, novels, books about science and religion, biblical analysis, books about typography. And I'm told that he likes to play. He likes to play the organ, he likes to play games, he likes puzzles and conundrums. And so perhaps it's particularly significant and particularly appropriate that he is our keynote speaker today. Quoting from Edith Hamilton's book, The Greek Way, "The Greeks were the first people in the world to play, and they played on a great scale." And so perhaps it is most appropriate that Donald Knuth is our closing and therefore ultimate keynote speaker for ITiCSE 2003.
I'll see if this mic's working. Oh, good. Boot for that wonderful introduction. I'm glad to see so many of you have crawled out of bed this morning after our delightful party last night. I'm quite honored that you're here. My topic, as you can see, I hope, is bottom-up education. And that's, so I just, I needed some sort of a title that would be catchy, and then I had to think of something to say to go with it. But really, what I'm talking about this morning are some things that I think about, that I feel very strongly about, very deeply. Most deeply held convictions, and it makes it hard for me to actually give this lecture because I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like arguing and trying to persuade anybody about a case. I was amused to note when I got to the environment of this university that to learn the Greek word for military is polemics, and verbal battles and so on. But I'm much more comfortable when I'm presenting a mathematical argument where I can give the proof and say QED. But when we get into topics of education, as you are all familiar, we're never on such safe grounds, and so we have to act on our gut feelings. And all I can tell you then today is why I'm personally convinced that certain directions are much better than others, as far as as far as my experience of a certain number of years goes, but I guess you all know this problem much better than I, and I actually have the luxury of not having to try to get referees to accept my paper, or not only do I already have tenure, I'm already retired, so I don't have to worry about job security. So I can propose any hypothesis and it's okay, and I don't have to measure it or anything like that. But and the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. If some of you decide to follow the recommendations that I'm going to discuss this morning, and others decide to go exactly the opposite way, the only way we'll really know is eventually by seeing what your students do and what my, depending on which camp you're in, and see whether or not what I say has any merit at all. So all I can say then is that it's my considered opinion that a lot of the trends that I observe, at least in the universities that I see in America, have been going a bit in the wrong direction as far as I'm concerned, because they're more top-down than bottom-up. Well, what do I really mean by this? It's not only computer science education that has this kind of a problem. It's also, any field is faced with a similar sort of a danger. That is, when we learn a field, we learn certain concrete things, and then as we get more and more knowledge, we learn more abstract versions of those things, and finally we find out that the most general concepts that we have and the most abstract concepts that we've learned are the ones that give us the best mileage, that we can really use an abstract concept and go in giant steps, whereas some of the more fundamental things that we started with are baby steps. This whole idea of the abstract thinking is something that, of course, we owe to the Greek school of science. Thousands of years, and it's wonderful to have high-level concepts. But the mistake that people make is then they say, okay, I'm not going to make my students mess around and waste their time learning any low-level concepts. They can get so much more out of the high-level concepts. Let's forget. Let's forget this this stuff that we actually started out on, and so then they teach students only the top stuff, the top level stuff, and the students are actually floundering because it's a little hard to build a house from the top, from the roof down. It's better to start with some foundations and erect things on that. And we forget that the way we learned something didn't turn out that bad for us. We actually came out being able to understand the high level concepts quite well, but we did it by starting at the bottom. So that's why some people, in physics would say, let's not have any labs, because students can just learn, the equations for quantum mechanics, and that's where real physics is. And in mathematics, you can say the only thing important is to study, Bourbaki abstractions and never learn how to actually compute the sum of 1 to n or something. Some of the fundamental techniques, and the same goes in other fields. But in computer science, the case is even stronger because I believe the main difference between a person who's going to be working with computers all their life and a computer scientist and a person in another field is precisely the ability to jump levels, from the low levels to the high levels and many levels in between, almost unconsciously. That we see things in the large, and at the same time we're seeing things in the small. We know that the way to solve a high-level database problem is first to add 1 to a certain counter, and then we have so we jump all the time between low levels and high levels. I'm extremely grateful then that the way I learned computers was by sitting in front of a machine and playing with its machine language. Very early on, in fact, that's where I got my there was no such thing as computer science, of course, in the 50s when I started. All I had was this machine sitting there with its lights flashing, and I got to push the buttons on it. That we can't do anymore in the same sense, but because the machines, even the machines that we have on our laptops, are still so intricate. It's hard for us to really understand what's all going on. But the more we say stick only to the high level and say the only way to do this is to start with some algebraic language or something like that. I think the less of a good intuition and the solid foundation we have really get going. Now, machine language isn't the whole story, obviously, but I think it's an important part of the story that's tended to get degraded, and I don't know, for example, how many Stanford students ever learn about it. One of the reasons why this has happened, probably the main reason this has happened, is that there was a long period during the 70s especially when computers, the actual machine language inside of computers got uglier and uglier and less desirable less palatable from all aesthetic points of view. Since high-level languages were doing so well, the thought was, well, only compilers are going to be writing programs in machine language, not human beings anymore. So let's design our computers so that they'll be fine when another computer is writing the program. And so the computer codes got more and more baroque and less attractive to teach until the point where it was really horrible to teach, I think. So it's natural that machine language went out of the educational system. On the other hand, the good news is that starting in the late 80s, a new brand of machines came on the scene and started to take over. In many senses, the so-called RISC machines, RISC, reduced instruction set machine, and these it was a great revelation to me. I think it was 1991 when I read the first edition of Hennessy and Patterson's book on machine architecture, and I realized that all of a sudden machine language was fun again. And beautiful, and actually even easier than it was when I started. So here was a chance, really, to sort of a nice window in time when we could take advantage and make and have a machine for educational purposes that would be actually designed for human beings to understand, and not just for machines to use as an intermediate talking machine to machine. Now I think a lot of you know that my life's work is to write a series of books called The Art of Computer Programming, and that in the 1990s, I decided to make new editions of the books that had been written in the 60s, and it became quite clear. My original plan was I was just going to finish the whole series, all 7 volumes, and then go back and put out new editions. But that was taking longer and longer. Unfortunately, people kept thinking of new things that ought to go into this book, and so I was getting further and further behind. But in the first edition, I had used a computer called MMIX that was typical of the best practice of the early 1960s, and this computer actually was. Well, some people hated it. A lot of people loved it. We had, mixed user groups, which were called Mug because we could drink coffee, and there were books written about using MMIX for programming. I was delighted to learn from Giorgio that he went into computer science because he was studying at the Aristotle University here in applied math, and he got a hold of this book, and he saw he saw the definition of the mixed computer, and all of a sudden, computing made sense. All of a sudden, he said, "Oh, that's the way those machines work." And so he says it changed his life, and he came here. I think one of the reasons that low level is appealing for starting people out is just this reason, that it's not that it becomes clear how a machine could do such things, and algebra is actually a rather high level concept. Imagine trying to teach like a third grader or a fourth grader about computers. I think obviously the way that would be most easy is to teach them some kind of a simple language where you say that a computer takes instructions where there's a number that might be that consists of an operation number and a box number where you put where you put data. And so the operation might say add box 1 to box 5 and put the answer in box 10. And then you could represent that by a code that says add 1, 5, 10. So, and a fourth grader could understand that. But if you tell a fourth grader, x equals y plus z, that's something that the fourth grader hasn't had yet, because algebra, I don't think, has penetrated down into fourth grade. In other words, it's a simpler concept to understand the way a machine works than to understand the way Java works. And if you start with whatever language you use to approach a machine, affects the whole. It affects to an extreme degree the kind of programs that you write. I've known people who were raised on APL as their first language, and they write programs that I could never, I could never imagine myself ever even conceiving that this could be done, because it's very natural to think that whatever language you're using, the constructions that are simplest to express in that language are the ones that are the most easiest for the machine to do. And APL is just so different often from the. I mean, you create a three-dimensional array, and then you do some operation on it, and then you shrink it down back to a number. This is you can do this in a short one-line APL program, but starting the machines the way I did, I would never conceive of solving the problem that way. Sometimes this limits me, and I'm not saying every program ought to be written in a way that minimizes the number of cycles. After all, the whole program might run in a microsecond, and so what does it matter if it takes 100 microseconds or 1 microsecond? It's done. But I'm talking about people who are trying to write the programs that are going to be used many times, and people who are going to do this for their, as a non-trivial part of their life, and not just the casual users of machine. So the language that we learn on gives us the basic understanding and intuition as to what is really easy to perform in the real world and what isn't. And to me, that's important. Now, in the art of computer programming, I had this machine called MMIX, but it was hopelessly out of date by the 1990s for many reasons, and so I began to realize early on that it was certainly not deserving of being remembered very many more years. So what I decided to do then is to design a new machine, which was this RISC machine, the reduced instruction set computer, that would reflect as far as I could tell, the machine for the next millennium, and the ones which we had some reason to believe that would be relevant for many more years to replace MIX, and so instead I have this machine called MMIX. And as I say, it was for the new millennium, so the extra M adds 1,000 to the thing and makes this number 2009 instead of 1009. So you remember that yesterday. Yesterday, Christos was talking about his current project, which is logical mix, and so I'm saying today we go from logical mix to MMIX, and in fact there was a kind of a nice omen when I got here to Thessaloniki. I was walking on the street on Sunday, and I found out that here last week there was a performance of something that's very close to MMIX going on here in Thessaloniki. So I took that as a confirmation that I'm on the right track. Now what I'm showing you here is called fascicle 1. The way I'm working art of computer programming in the next few years, according to the plan, is that thank you. The plan is that I'll be mostly writing volume 4, but every once in a while there'll be something that needs to replace part of the existing volumes 1, 2, and 3. So the publisher and I are going to periodically release what we call fascicles, which are, in some cases, are beta test versions of volume 4, and in other cases are things that belong in volume 1, 2, or 3. The first fascicle, it's on the web now, but it will be published officially next year. Is one of these that replaces part of volume 1 part of volume 1. So there's the sections in volume 1 that describe the mixed computer are to be replaced by this fascicle. And I'll just read you a little bit from the introduction to the fascicle. You can't read this, but I'll read it to you. Many readers are noted of thinking, why does Knuth replace MIX by another machine instead of just sticking to a high-level programming language? Hardly anybody uses assemblers these days. Such people are entitled to their opinions. They need not bother reading the machine language parts of my books. But the reasons for machine language that I gave in the preface to Volume 1, written in the early 60s, remain valid today. Bullet 1 here. One of the principal goals of my books is to show how high-level constructions are actually implemented in machines, not merely simply to show how to apply them. So I explain coroutine linkage, tree structures, random number generation, high-precision arithmetic, radix conversion, packing of data, combinatorial searching, recursion, and so on from the ground up. Second point, the programs needed in my books are generally so short that their main points can be grasped easily. Third, people who are more than casually interested in computers should have at least some idea what the underlying hardware is. Otherwise the programs they write will be pretty weird. I mentioned that already. And, next, machine language is necessary in any case as output of some of the software that I described. And expressing basic methods like algorithms for sorting and searching in machine language makes it possible to carry out meaningful studies of the effects of cache size, memory size, other hardware characteristics like the speed of the memory, the pipelining, multiple issue, look-aside buffers, the size of cache blocks, and so on when comparing different methods. So none of these things would be well done if I didn't have some kind of machine language. Then it says, moreover, if I did use a high-level language, what language should it be? And everybody knows that every 5 or 6 years another language comes on the scene, and I don't have time to rewrite my books every 5 years. So that's obvious reasons why I needed MMIX. And MMIX, the name, MMIX is a polyunsaturated, 100% natural computer. You know, it's also buzzword compliant. The way I got the number 2009 is by taking these computers, the Cray 1, IBM 801, RISC 2, Clipper, so on, Alpha 2164, and average, you know, add these numbers up and divide by 14, and you get 2009. Now, it's the same way MIX was 1009 by a different format. So it was, you know, obviously the right way to go. And here's a picture of the machine as seen by a programmer, not drawn to scale. There are 256 registers numbered from 0 to 255, and general purpose registers, and then there are 32 special purpose registers that I'll, you know, I can tell you something more about later. And then there's memory, virtual memory of 2 to the 64th bytes, which is enough to last for a little while. The basic setup, and I'll show you how simple it is essentially. But that's the starting point. Then is that I wanted to have, for the purposes of my book, a computer that would serve those bulleted points I read to you a minute ago. And my intention was to make this machine satisfy several things simultaneously. First of all, it had to be realistic in the sense that it would indeed reflect best practice of contemporary machines as far as I could see coming into the next many years. But secondly, it had to be easy to learn, and it had to be fun to use. So it should be very clean to design, and not so this is almost impossible to be both realistic and clean. But I think at least it's as clean as any as any other possibilities, and I went through many drafts, and it kept getting cleaner and cleaner. So anyway, it's relatively clean. I had wonderful help as I was designing the machine because the principal designers of the MIPS chip, John Hennessy, and the Alpha chip, Dick Seitz, they both worked with me on this, and also some people that worked on Spark also have been consulting. Now, I take the blame for any faults in the machine, but if there's any merit in it, it's because I did have expert help from these people. I'm sure that I'll forget I might as well tell you now that if you have questions that you're dying to ask as I'm presenting this, go right ahead and ask now, because after my talk, I've got 2 T-shirts here that I propose to award to the people who ask the best questions in this lecture. One is large and one is extra large. So keep that in mind in case in case any of you want to ask a question. You might be eligible for this great prize. Now, Good try. Now, okay, besides that first fascicle, another thing that's on the web is but it's easier to buy the book, is this book, which is part of the lecture notes in computer science series, and it describes in great detail the machine, all of the most arcane features of the machine that sometimes arise when you're doing interrupts and some of the way virtual memory is calculated that most people will never have to go into, but everything is described in this book, including the complete programs for two simulators that I'll talk about, and a complete implementation, for example, of the IEEE floating point routines in terms of ordinary 32-bit computer, and so on, all expressed as what I call literate programs. In this book, I'll show you a few pages just of the early documentation of MMIX. So first of all, MMIX, can you see that? It's a 64-bit machine, so we work all the time with 64-bit numbers, and I believe that 64 is such a nice number that it's going to be more and more predominant as time goes on, and there won't be a call for 128. 64 is, for example, is 8 times 8, and one of the nice things that develops is that you can represent 8 by 8 Boolean matrices in a 64-bit word and do some very nice clean things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So every instruction consists of 4 bytes. So 8 plus 8 plus 8. So instruction is only 32 bits long. And there are 256 possible operation codes, and then you have 256 things to put in each of the positions X, Y, and Z, which is, and for example, here's an instruction 32.123 says set register 1 to the sum of registers 2 and 3, because 32 is the add instruction for summing, and so this is the destination, and these are the source registers. And so, this you see, it's easy then to visualize the way instructions are because the byte structure and reading these commands in hexadecimal is quite easy to see instead of having to go through some really complicated packing instructions that are used in other machines. Now 256 is a it's a big number, lots of instruction, and so as you can see on this T-shirt, you might say, well, how is somebody going to learn 256 instructions? Well, fortunately, they fall into a small number of classes, and half of the instructions are immediate versions of the other half. So it's actually as you see, if you are interested in going into the details, it's easy to pick these up and get them in your memory after an hour or so to get most of the instructions. And I can go into any more details later, but I first want to just mention a few other things. I said about floating point. You see, in my books, it was important that I be able to have to be able to discuss floating point arithmetic, or one of the very important standards that goes into a machine and has a lot of things that textbooks don't emphasize enough, and so. I was careful to implement the standard in what I think is the best way. And but you see, from my point of view, I was designing a machine for the art of computer programming. But but the machine I came up with, I really believe is ideal for classroom instructions. For students in general, and whether or not they care about the art of computer programming. because the machine is realistic and a clean design. So here is why I'm talking about it this morning as potentially a really good educational tool for all of your students. For many different kinds of courses at many different levels. The main competitor to this idea would be to use an actual machine that's out there that you can buy the chip. Here I have a machine-independent machine. Is the student going to be motivated for doing something that instead of the one that you can buy at the electronics store? The problem with the real machines is that they're much uglier to use. And in fact, the only unrealistic thing about MMIX is that it's too clean. I mean, it does certain operations with floating point, with also even with ordinary division, the way they should have been done on all computers, but aren't. And so students might get the wrong idea that real world machines are nicer than they are. But I think that's really the only downside, because learning whichever machine you learn about, it's very easy to transfer that knowledge and that intuition you have to whatever machine comes along as years go on. I mean, it really doesn't make that much difference. A person doesn't spend his whole life using only one programming language. So every time a new language comes along, you adapt to it pretty quick. And all you have, but the first one you learn is important for you in order to get the basic concepts. So for the educational purposes, in the university, having something that was designed especially for education seems better to me than having something that comes out of the commercial marketplace and it is always changing year to year. Every time you base a course on one manufacturer's product, then the other manufacturer comes out with another thing, and you have to change your course, or somebody else. I mean, it's very hard to go with one manufacturer or another. But if you have something that's designed by people who are sort of in the educational side of things, then we have total control over it, and we can keep it clean. There's ways to make versions of MMIX if necessary, but so far that hasn't become necessary. Okay, now one of the things that's in that MMIXware book is this little program here, I'm not going to go into, but it's an exercise with an answer. Suppose there was no instruction, that fint instruction, which means convert a floating number to an integer number, fixed point number. And so then there's a little program that runs through and calculates